Hello friends, and welcome to a new YouTube video. So today, as you might have guessed from the title, I am going to be showing you guys and talking to you guys about my entire art journey, starting from when I was about 13 in 2005 all the way until now. So just as a forewarning, I have a feeling this video is going to be very long, so buckle in, bust out your sketchbook, fold your laundry, something or other. It's going to be a lot of talking. And of course, I am going to be showing you guys the artwork as I'm going through each year as well. And something before we begin, something that I want to mention is that unfortunately, the older artwork that I'm going to be showing you guys, I don't have it anymore. A lot of my really old stuff I think is been thrown out long ago, or it's hiding somewhere in my mom's basement. So pretty much all the old stuff that you're going to see is stuff that I gathered from old online art platforms that I shared my artwork to. So keep that in mind when we're going through all these pieces. Basically, it was the best that I had to offer from that year, because like social media now, it was the same back then. You know, you were only showing the best of the best that you had to offer. You're not going to be seeing all the really ugly artwork that I probably made abundances of back then. So without further ado, let's begin. So if you guys have been following me for a little while, you probably have already heard me talk about this, but like everyone else, of course, I had been drawing and coloring since I was a little kid. But I think the turning point for me when I when I had really taken an interest in drawing and was drawing maybe more than your average kid would, was about when I was 12. And this was upon my obsession of Cardcaptor Sakura. I was just completely enamored by this magical girl anime, and I just felt really compelled to make fan art for it. And in those early days, I was just probably copying the official artwork that I found on the internet, and I don't have it anymore. It's long gone, and I could not find any of it on my old art platforms, but you're probably not missing out. I don't think it was great. But so I do have some artwork to show you from 2005, so quite early on. So 2005, I was about 13, and yeah, I was literally just grabbing lined paper, computer copy paper, and just math pencils or mechanical pencils that was just lying around the house, and I was copying official artwork from different animes like Gundam Seed or Inuyasha and things like that. And I was sharing all of this early anime fan art to this website called The Otaku. I don't know if any of you guys remember it, but that was like my first experience of like an online art community. And this one, of course, as the title suggests, it was anime specific. And for me, when I was in like all of high school, I didn't have any friends that were also interested in anime, and in those days liking anime was seen as kind of lame or weird. And so I was so happy to find an online art community of people who were also interested in anime, and so that was my way of connecting with people who had the same interests as me. And from there, I was able to feel some kind of drive and excitement about not only getting to interact with other people who liked anime, but also me creating artwork for these things that I loved so much. And so, yeah, I've been sharing my artwork online for a very long time. Along with anime, I'm sure many of you also are very much influenced by Disney as well. Those 90s animated Disney movies were my absolute jam. They still are. I still adore them to this day. And so along with me copying the anime official artwork, I also sometimes would copy the Disney official artwork as well. After, spending some time using these graphite pencils on computer paper, I graduated to using Crayola colored pencils on computer paper. And that was kind of my first stepping stone into trying out a new medium. And then as I kind of progressed through 2006, I naturally wanted to explore other interests that appealed to me. And so I was slowly finding that I wasn't able to push out enough creativity by copying official artwork. And so I began to create work that wasn't copying somebody else. And you can see here, she was trying. She was definitely trying. And you can kind of tell I was very obsessed with pop punk music in my teenage years, and I think it's very evident in the drawings that I'm showing you here. The fashion is very of that time. And I remembered that this particular drawing here was my first attempt at like a really elaborate background, and I was so proud of myself because seemed like such a intimidating task. And funny enough, to this day I still find intricate backgrounds intimidating to do, but props to Past Me for taking this on. And eventually, I don't know exactly when, but it looks like it probably was during this year, I finally saved up some money and got Premiere Prismacolor color pencils, which are a much nicer quality than Crayola. And I think a lot of the Prismacolor pencils that I have now probably are still from that set. And they made such a world of difference in terms of the vibrancy of the color because they're so much more pigmented. And then I'm able to blend the colors better and layer and all that stuff. And you can probably see here that I was actually starting to use the color pencils as the line art as well. And I was kind of exploring using varying weights on the line art. And looking at it now, I'm like, it still like works, and it kind of it translates to what I do now, because I do really like using colored inks or watercolors or whatever as my line art today. So it's interesting to see that. And guys, I shipped Sasuke and Sakura from Naruto so hard. I found so much artwork back then that I did of this pairing. And I also really like this drawing that I did of Winry in Edward Elric's outfit from Full Metal Alchemist. I'm like rewatching it right now, so it's funny to see this. But yeah, lots of fan art, but at least at this point I was finally breaking out of copying official artwork and doing my own thing. And then eventually I also got some fine liners, probably Sakura Micron liners like most people use. And so I was using the fine liners to do the line art, and then I was using my colored pencils to do the rendering. And I have to talk about this. So a girl in my high school, she found out that I like to draw. And so she was like, hey, can you draw this book character for me? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so she just like wrote down a description of the character from the book, saying, golden eyes and brown hair, da-da-da-da. And I didn't know anything about this character except for the description that she gave me. And I did this drawing for her. And I eventually got curious enough, and lo and behold, I read Twilight, which, that was the hot thing at the time, and became obsessed. I was so obsessed with Twilight in my teenage years, and in turn obsessed with vampires in my teenage years. As we progress through these years, you're gonna see more vampires. And I remembered, I think this was one of the really more evident times or beginning times of me using an actual reference photo of a real photograph to implement in my drawing. So I'm pretty positive the reference photo I used for this drawing of Edward Cullen was a picture of Adam Brody, because I was so into him. I was obsessed with the OC. Seth Cohen was like my ideal boyfriend. But yeah. And then moving into 2007, basically just continuing to make fan art for whatever anime and things that I was obsessed with at the time. I was clearly very, very much into Bleach during this year, and was compelled to, draw the favorite couples or pairings that I had at the time. And again, just kind of experimenting with adding in more backgrounds, putting the characters in a setting, having characters interact with each other. and also these really, really cringy song quote text on top of the illustrations. So bad. But, you know, it's funny to look back at. But that font choice, yikes. And then as the year progressed, people began to request artwork from me, and at the time I was a teenager, and I was just so excited and flattered that people wanted me to draw something for them. And so I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And it basically just spiraled into all of these different people asking me to draw their Mary Sue character with their favorite anime boyfriend, basically. And eventually I just felt like I'm doing so many of these and I'm not gaining anything from this. And so eventually I finally stopped taking on requests, because don't work for free, guys. Just even when you're a teenager, even when it's early on, don't work for free. It's not worth it. And like I mentioned earlier, I was kind of living on these online platforms, and I was making friends with people who were, we were mutuals and we liked the same, shows and had the same interests. And so I was building friendships with people online, and in turn, I would draw their original characters if I was a fan of whatever they were doing. And so, again, lots of vampires, kind of exploring more like darker themes, which very much fit into my, interest in that pop punk, angsty kind of vibe. And yes, more of the cringy song lyric texts on top of the illustrations. Oh yeah, and then so like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, for the most part, I only have, the best of the best that I had to offer in that year available online. But I did find this, I think this was my first attempt at watercolors in this portrait, and I actually don't even remember making it, but clearly I had no idea what I was doing. But, I was trying out a new medium. And then I also found this piece here, which was apparently my first attempt at digital art. I had done the line art with traditionally, and then I scanned it in and I colored it on whatever digital program using a mouse. That is insane. You would have to pay me a lot of money to do anything with a mouse, any kind of coloring or rendering with a mouse. So props to me. It's very flat, but using a mouse to color, oh my gosh. And then yeah, so that was kind of my first foray into digital art. And when I was in high school, one of my classes, we had access to using drawing tablets, and so I was able to actually use a drawing tablet for the first time. And I was kind of flip-flopping between Photoshop as well as Corel Painter. And then eventually my uncle, he bought me a Wacom bamboo drawing tablet, and it's super tiny. I literally still have it. I still use it. It's over 10 years old at this point, but it's still going. And believe it or not, I actually I've never owned any other drawing tablets. It's literally the only one I've had, and it's lasted me all these years. The only other thing that I have would be my iPad, which is obviously leaps and bounds beyond that little drawing tablet, but the iPad is limited in the sense that I only use it for Procreate. So whenever I'm using Photoshop, Illustrator, anything like that, I still use this teeny tiny Wacom tablet. And yeah, it's probably on its last legs, but still going. I'm so impressed by it. And to come full circle from that first Edward Cullen drawing that I showed you guys before I'd even knew who he was, of course, I became very familiar with him and the Twilight series, and I was obsessed with those books. So I went ahead and drew him again, and I used the same pose. I probably used the same reference photo, and it's pretty impressive to see the difference. Of course, it's a different medium. It's, color pencils versus digital, but just the way that I constructed the face and everything, it really shows my growth. And it's really funny to compare the two. And then moving into 2008, I was very, very obsessed with shoujo manga. I would get Shoujo Beat, the monthly magazine every month, and I was very much into Nana, which has a really, really beautiful, distinct kind of edgy style. And so, of course, I made fan art for it, and I tried to kind of mimic the look of it in a way, but obviously I didn't have screen tones, and so I just used like a hatching kind of shading method with fine liners. And Nana, not only was I, of course, obsessed with the story and the characters, but the overall aesthetic of it definitely fit into my love of the kind of angsty emo look in my teenage years. So it really was like the perfect Venn diagram of my interests coming together. And then, yeah, I completely forgot about these until I dug them up, but I had also been creating my own original characters, even though I knew I was not a writer. I had no intentions of actually writing a book or a graphic novel or a comic or anything like that. But I think, I was seeing my mutual art friends making original characters and having stories and stuff. And so I was like, I want to do that too. And so, I made a bunch of different original characters with light backstories and names and stuff. Honestly, it's so cliche too. This one here was these characters. I remembered the guy was a vampire and the girl was a werewolf because, I was very much into vampires and Twilight and that whole affair. So yeah, that super cliche. And then these characters were just like high school students, and you can really see the anime manga influence of, these like school uniforms with like the cherry blossoms in the back. But I was also really, really into into shows like The OC and Gossip Girl, and so you can kind of see these like two worlds colliding in this illustration. And so, yeah, I was, getting very, very comfortable using colored pencils and fine liners, and that was kind of the groove that I was in. But as someone who was very much into manga and anime, I knew that the majority of people that were doing artwork in this kind of realm were using Copic markers, and I just could not afford them. It was, Copic markers are not cheap. And so I guess at some point I was at the art supply store or something and got a Reeves set of watercolors. I remember it was like a 12 pan colored set. And so that was, I think, my mindset of getting those was, okay, maybe I can use watercolors to achieve a similar look and effect as the Copic markers. And so I was debating whether or not I was going to show you guys this, but I thought I had to do it because Koga was and is my favorite character from Inuyasha. And I died laughing when I came across this because I completely forgot about it. And yeah, I was like, this is so embarrassing, but also I think that a lot of you guys can probably relate. I definitely did not have any kind of love life whatsoever in high school, but you best believe I was going to be drawing some hot anime boys instead. Yeah, my teenage thirst was real in this drawing. I probably used a reference photo of like Channing Tatum or whatever, hot teen throb at the time. And then I found this drawing of one of my original characters. Probably a representation of my ideal fantasy boyfriend at the time, decked out with the ridiculous gelled hair and lip ring. And then at some point I remembered, my art teachers in high school were actually amazing. I never had that experience with my art teachers saying that anime is not real art, or they never belittled me or anything like that. They saw the techniques that I was doing and my exploration of different mediums and things like that, and so they were really, really cool about that, my interest in anime and making artwork that was inspired by anime. But eventually, they had to let me know that it'll make you a stronger artist to explore other subject matters and other styles. And so eventually I made this portrait, which I've shown you guys before, but this was like my first that I remember, my first like realism portrait, which I did of Rihanna during her umbrella era. And yeah, it was just graphite pencil and a sketchbook. And then I remembered, and this stuck with me to this very day. I remember my friend, I was, excitedly showing her my sketchbook. And this was a friend that was a real life friend and not like my mutual art friends online who were seeing my artwork all the time. And she said to me something along the lines of, well, you don't want to be a one-trick pony. And so that has been ingrained in me ever since. And so I think that probably, and along with, my art teacher recommending that I broaden my horizons, I also ended up exploring drawing animals as well. And so this tiger I did using watercolors, and then I did this wolf drawing using colored pencils. And then in my very last year in high school, I had my first and only attempt using oil paints. I remembered when I told my art teacher what I was kind of going for. I wanted to draw, or I wanted to paint a female figure with like a beautiful elaborate dress. And so she recommended, she was like, oh, you should take a look at John Singer Sargent, who is a master at creating these these oil paintings of women with beautiful elaborate dresses. And needless to say, I tried my best. Clearly, I was trying my best, but did not come anywhere near his expertise and masterful way of painting. Oh yeah, and then like I'd mentioned, I was so into pop punk music, and so of course Paramore was like my absolute favorite band. And I did these fan art pieces of Hayley Williams from Paramore, and you can see all of my teenage angst coming out. And it's so funny because I felt I wanted to portray this like emo angsty, persona, but in reality, I didn't have any real I feel like I didn't have any real problems when you're a teenager. Anything and everything that happens to you is the end of the world. So, and yeah, I actually really, I look back at these like very fondly. And the watercolor piece that I did here of Hayley, I kind of really appreciate how energetic and loose it feels compared to the work that I make now. And then, like I said, more vampires. And this one, again, definitely used a reference photo of whatever, hottie of the week. And you can really see how big of a difference using a photo reference of an actual person makes, rather than using anime characters as reference. You can really see how I executed the folds in the jacket, especially. Like looking at it now, even today, I'm like, looks pretty decent. And yeah, more shirtless dudes. I remember this one specifically was my friend Kyung's original vampire character. Hi Kyung, if you're watching this. And then as soon as I finished high school, I went straight into college at 17. I moved out. My first year was a 1-year art fundamentals course at Sheridan. For those of you who are not familiar, art fundamentals at Sheridan is basically just a year of trying out lots of different fields of art, and so that you can build your portfolio as well as figure out exactly what you want to do. Because when I graduated high school, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to be in a creative field. I just didn't know exactly what it was. And so taking on this program was really, really beneficial for me. And even though I was, making tons of work for my school assignments, I still found ways to spend time doing personal work, and mainly using color pencils and a little bit of watercolors, I think. And very much inspired by Alice in Wonderland, very much inspired by pinups, still am to this day. And yeah, so the work that I made in my art fundamentals year, not super creative because it was more about learning those foundations. So I had life drawing classes where we, did live drawing of nude figures from models. We did painting where we focused on acrylic paint specifically. I had a technical drawing class. I also had like a 3D sculpture course. I'm terrible at 3D anything. And yeah, in that year I learned a lot, and eventually I came at a crossroads of, do I want to pursue graphic design or do I want to pursue illustration? That's kind of what I narrowed it down to. And the big contributor to that was my 2D illustration course or class that I had that year. That was definitely by far my favorite class. And it was the first time I was introduced to gouache. But prior to that, I had no idea what it was. And the way that we used gouache in that year was much more flat and graphic. We were not learning how to use it in a more in any kind of rendered way. It was very much used like poster paint. It was very flat, more focused on shapes. And then in the end, I did decide to go into graphic design because I thought that it was the more practical choice. And yeah, so I didn't stay at Sheridan for graphic design. I went to a different college, a different city. And so when I moved to the new city to go to the new college, I didn't bring my acrylics or all that stuff because it was just too much to bring. And so the medium that I did bring with me was watercolors and I think my colored pencils. And so I pretty much found any opportunity to do illustration in my graphic design assignments. And yeah, I remember doing this illustration and I was so proud of it. It was an assignment that we had to do to recreate a book cover, and again, like I said, I was obsessed with Alice in Wonderland, so of course I had to do an illustration for that. And then I don't remember what this balloon illustration was for, but I still actually kind of like it. Obviously I think my skill set has developed a lot, but I really like the primary colors and kind of the composition of it and everything. Obviously during college I was more focused on creating work for my classes, but every so often I would find time to make work that had nothing to do with school. And mainly it was just, I did some portraits on some toned paper using pastels and colored pencils. And pretty much the majority of my college years I drifted away from anime and manga. It wasn't as though it was like, oh, that's beneath me now. But I think during those years, I just lost interest in it. And I can kind of see, the work that I made too felt more and more distant from it as well. And then as the years progressed in graphic design school, of course, I began to take a really big interest in typography. And so I was also using my interest in typography and then my interest in illustration together. And I was beginning to adapt my illustration style into whatever suited the project the best. And so I really completely forgot about these ones, but of course the remnants of my love for pop punk music still lingered. These were illustrations based off of songs by the band Something Corporate, who they did like a reunion tour back in 2010, and I got to see them, and it was like such a prolific moment in my early 20s or whatever it was. And then I think naturally, because I was in school for graphic design, we were doing everything was on the computer, and so I did more illustrations using Photoshop and a drawing tablet. And I remember being really interested in Alphonse Mucha, and so the assignment that we did here was to do a couple sample calendar pages, and I did some based on, very, very much inspired by Alphonse Mucha. Even though, like I had mentioned, I was spending more time focused on the work for school, partway through, I ended up getting a part-time job at an art supply store. And so I think that helped spark my interest again in using traditional media. But I wasn't really focused on anything specific. I was just sort of, whenever I had time or whenever I felt like I would make random artwork here and there. Oh yes. And I loved Moulin Rouge. I was obsessed with Moulin Rouge. And I remember we had an assignment where we just literally just had to make like a small book. And I think most people did, they would just like do photography or stock photos and throw on some type. But I was like, no, I'm gonna do a fully rendered illustrated book from using stills from Moulin Rouge. I remembered this assignment was so stressful for me because it took so long. But you know, I think that was my mode all through school. Was anytime we got an assignment, I would do the most. Like I would always do way more than I needed to, because I really wanted to incorporate my own illustrations into the assignment, even if it wasn't required. There were so many cases where the assignment could have just used stock photos or something, but I always wanted to find ways to do illustration because that truly deep down was what I really wanted to do. That being said, I don't regret going into graphic design because there were a lot of things about my education in design that helps me today, and there are stuff that I did there that were design based that I still enjoy. Like pulled up some of these logo designs that I did, and I think in learning logo design, branding, I think that really helped me a lot today in terms of being able to do the branding for my own business as an independent artist, and it gave me an understanding of how to market myself, how to have kind of a visual, just like understanding visual appeal and cohesion. And I think logo design and branding, typography, those are kinds of things that I don't think I would have necessarily taught myself if I didn't go to design school. So, and kind of a culmination of all those things was, and I think one of my favorite projects was we were asked to redesign book covers again. And I remembered at the time I was really, really into the Hunger Games trilogy, and I hated those covers. I still do. Sorry, no offense to whoever actually designed those covers, but they just weren't my aesthetic. They just didn't appeal to me. And so it was kind of the perfect thing for me to choose. And yeah, I really enjoyed creating these illustrations that were indicative of each book, but then also still read as a collection altogether. And we actually got to, and I actually had them. So I, printed out the sleeves, covered the books, and then I made a box set for it. And another thing that we had in school was a photography course. And so that helped me gain knowledge on product photography, even though a lot of the education that I got about actually knowing how to use a DSLR has completely gone out the window. I don't remember any of those things, but at least it taught me a little bit about, lighting and how to shoot the product and compose the image and things like that. And then I graduated graphic design and I moved to Toronto with a friend who was already living here. And I was really lost. I had no plan. I moved to Toronto because I knew that this was where a lot of the job opportunities were going to be. And I had a 3-week free internship at a design studio. And it kind of made me realize that this wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to sit in an office all day making, lame brochures, moving type around and stuff. I knew that an entry-level design job and a lot of the graphic design work is not going to be necessarily super creative. But unfortunately, I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do otherwise. And so I was kind of just miserably working at a clothing retail store and every so often making personal artwork, experimenting with different mediums and styles. And I also kind of dipped back into some fan art, kind of reminiscent of, the earlier works that I was making in high school. And yeah, I was just very lost. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And I remembered I made this piece because there was a poster design contest or something, and I was thinking, okay, maybe if I don't want to work in a design studio, maybe I can try and be a freelance graphic designer. That way I can try and do more creative things and I could take on projects that appealed to me. But being freelance with no experience, no connections, it's very hard. And so I remembered every so often getting a design job here and there. My sister and her friend, they created a business together. They were making handmade nail polish. And so they were like, hey, did you want to create our logo and, our business card? And I remembered really enjoying doing that because it was, more creative and I had more freedom about the look. But I knew overall that graphic design just really wasn't my calling. And then at some point, I just something in me was like, maybe I should bust out some of those, those India inks and watercolors that I haven't touched in forever. And reconnecting with those mediums, it really like sparked something in me. I remembered being so excited when I first started using the India ink again. And I think at that point, I also quit my awful retail job in clothing and I switched to a different retail job, which was a much more positive environment in general. And so I think that helped as well. But finally, at this point, I was like, okay, this is the work that I think I want to make. This is something that is really interesting and exciting for me. And then after, experimenting with using the watercolors and the India ink, I remember making this particular illustration of Chibiusa, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, this kind of looks like gouache. And so I busted out my gouache that I hadn't used in ages. And that was also really exciting and fun for me. As you can see here though, I was still using it in that very flat graphic way because that was the way that I was taught to use it when I was at Sheridan. And I didn't even really think that you were supposed to or you were able to use it in any other way. But all the same, I still really liked how flat and bold and matte it looked. And then, in 2015, I was, gaining a little bit more momentum and I was getting a better understanding of using these mediums and exploring doing more elaborate illustrations. And the benefit of living in Toronto is that there's tons of different events and local things happening in the city. And so eventually I found out about different like outdoor summer arts and crafts festivals and markets. And so I would split a table with my sister and her friend who had the nail polish business. And so we would table at these like more kind of generic arts and crafts markets. And I was mainly just selling prints at the time because, again, it was all very, very new to me. And so I just went to like Staples and like local local print shops to replicate or reproduce my illustrations. And because I was doing these generic art markets that, they would have people selling original artwork, they'd have people selling soaps, artisan stuff, all over the map. And so I decided to try and make artwork that had like a wider appeal and to like a broader audience. And so I made these illustrations that were more heavily typography based, and it kind of, helped bridge the gap of my interest in illustration and then my interest in typography from when I was in school. And I also did like hand painted greeting cards, just trying to explore different things that would appeal to this general art market audience that I was trying to sell work to. And when I was doing these markets, I was seeing, a few sales here and there, but it wasn't anything like that I could live off of in any way. And so I was just trying to find ways to sell stuff that would appeal to as many people as possible. And then along with the art markets, because the art markets wasn't enough, and I was still, of course, having to work my day job. And then so I thought, okay, maybe I'll apply to art galleries too, since Toronto has tons of them, and there'd always be like open calls for like group shows and things like that. And so applied to many, got into a few. And so I was experimenting with trying to make original artwork with acrylics on different subsurfaces like this, like wood slab or oval canvases. And I actually have a lot of these old paintings still, because even though these pieces did show here and there in like big group shows, I didn't actually do a lot of selling. I didn't make a lot of sales. So I think I actually will put these guys up in my next shop update this month. And then seems like 2015 was a big year for me. I was doing a lot, or a lot of firsts, I guess, or exploring a lot of different things. And so 2015 was also marked the first time I did a convention, and I did Anime North. It was the first and only time I've done Anime North. For those of you who are familiar, Anime North is notoriously hard to get into because it's all by lottery. So I was very lucky that year. And because it was my first time doing an anime or a comic convention, I had so little time to try and produce like a whole slew of items, because as you saw earlier, a lot of the stuff that I was making was more for a generic audience. And so I was like, oh crap, I'm doing an anime convention. I need to bring fan art. And a lot of the I wasn't gonna bring my old high school stuff. So a lot of the illustrations that I did for that convention was digital because I knew it was just gonna be a faster turnaround. And doing that convention really opened up my eyes because not only was it kind of very reminiscent of the kind of joy that I felt in those early high school years connecting with other anime fans online, but as well as just financially, it was so much better. Like doing that one convention, I probably made the same amount of money that I did at like all of those like little dinky art markets combined. So it was like the perfect kind of merriment of a great atmosphere amongst people with a more niche, it's a more niche audience. And so I was amongst people who I got along with really well and then also made way better sales. And then later that year, I decided to make a more significant effort in participating in Inktober. I didn't end up keeping up with the entire month, but I think I made maybe 10 or so illustrations that year. And they were all fan art of different characters and fandoms of things that kind of felt a little bit Halloween-y. And yeah, so I actually still have a bunch of these illustrations that I've put up in my shop. And I mainly used watercolors and inks that year. And then so moving into 2016, this kind of marked the year where I had decided, okay, clearly the anime comic convention market is definitely where it's at for me. And so I spent much more time focusing on that. And so I made tons of illustrations, mostly watercolor and ink illustrations for different various fandoms. And yeah, not only was it's so much more fun to attend those conventions, but yeah, the sales were a lot better too. I think this was the year where I really got a good handle on using watercolors. And looking at the artwork, I still actually sell prints of a lot of these things. Funny enough though, at this point, I still had a very, very small social media following. I had less than 1,000 followers when I was back in 2016 making this work. And so I did okay at conventions and stuff, but I think I probably opened up my online store around this time as well. And those kinds of sales were not great at all because, again, I had a very, very small social media following at that time. But I think this was around the time as well that I decided, okay, I'm going to try and dedicate more time to posting artwork on Instagram. And I think at some point during this era, I decided to switch my Instagram from being like a personal / art Instagram to just being an art Instagram, because I was seeing how social media really benefited artists outside of conventions, because conventions only happen, a handful of times of the year, and I only went to ones that were like local to me. And so I knew that I needed to build that online presence to try and drive sales to my shop. And so like I mentioned, I wasn't traveling for conventions because that was just, I don't have a car, I don't drive, so that was just going to be too much for me. And so again, I was still trying to explore other avenues that was within Toronto. And so this local art gallery called Hashtag, every year they do a holiday show where it's like a big group show and everyone submits work that are either 4x4 inches or 6x6 inches. And so I decided to make a little series for that. And I did these acrylic portraits of these girls with these like crystal teardrops. And they all sold. And I remembered being so pumped that I was actually like making sales at a gallery. And it was nice to make original artwork since, as you can see, most of the work that I made during that year was all fan art. And so moving into 2017, it kind of went similarly to 2016 in the sense that I was focusing on making traditional artwork, traditional fan art to bring as prints to conventions. And I was just continuing to hone in on my skills using watercolors and inks. And all the while I was still continuing to work at my retail job part-time. And I think the most notable fan art that I did in that year was my Sailor Moon Girl Gang themed illustrations, which I still love. They're super fun. I'm selling the originals in my shop now, and I have sets, like mini print sets, and I have stickers and stuff. And it has since spawned some cosplays, which has been so cool. So amazing to see that in person and to see people, want to recreate artwork that I made. That was a really, really cool feeling. And then when Inktober rolled around that year, I decided, okay, I am really determined finally to actually give this a real go. And so I was inspired by another artist on Instagram, Lana J Art, and she had done a series of illustrations of like an alphabet of witches. And so I really liked that idea. And so I rolled with that theme for my Inktober illustrations, and that really put me through the ringer. It was the first time I was producing so much artwork in such a short amount of time, but I was so determined to see it through. And that was when that's when I gained momentum and my social media following finally began to grow. I remember it hitting over 1,000 followers, and it was such a big deal for me. The alphabetic witches of that Inktober in 2017, I think, was like a really pivotal point in my kind of art journey. And then so for the hashtag gallery show, I went ahead and did another round of 6x6 paintings. This time I had actually used watercolors and inks, and then I did these like little cute freckles using little glitter stars and stuff. Super cute. I think I'll probably revisit that theme soon. And then the guys at hashtag gallery were recognizing my work, and they were selling at that, that big annual group show. They approached me and asked if I'd be interested in actually having a solo show with them. And it's the only time I've ever had a solo show. It's my first and only time. And I was still juggling my retail job. So it was a very challenging thing to take on, but I knew it was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. So the theme was, the show was called Femme Fatale, and the theme that I went with was women paired with things in nature that are either, like poisonous or carnivorous plant, or, apex predators, but I also wanted it to still feel very feminine. And so the perfect example of what a lot of my work is pairing like an extreme femininity with kind of a fierceness about women. I remember having a really, really great time at the opening night. My biggest fear was that no one would show up and I would just be like standing there alone in this gallery. But so many people came, all of my friends and friends of friends came, and it was a really, really great opening night. It felt really good. Unfortunately, I didn't really sell a lot. A lot of these pieces I still have just like scattered around my apartment, but I think that it was a really, really good learning experience. And if I were to ever do a show like this again, I have a better idea of what to expect and how much work I should make and things like that. Because I definitely didn't make as much work as I wanted to, because I was trying to juggle my part-time job with it. And so yeah, I learned a lot, and it was a very good experience. And then before you know it, Inktober is upon us once again. And so I wanted to build upon the success that I had in the previous year. And so this year I had picked the theme mythical beings, because I wanted an excuse to draw, monster girls and mythical creatures. And I actually had created a prompt list, and I posted it on Instagram, and other people followed along, and we had the hashtag going and everything. And it was such a fun experience seeing other people's interpretations of the things that I was drawing. And then I did my last round of pieces for hashtag gallery, that annual holiday show. And for this series of paintings, I did these Japanese portraits using the Chiyogami paper for the kimonos. And you've probably seen me do this again since. I really, really like using that paper. It's so beautiful, and I have so much of it. So it was nice to use that theme, and I've now since done it multiple times because I really, really enjoyed it. And then moving into 2019, I remembered towards the beginning of the year, I hit 30,000 Instagram followers, which was so mind-boggling for me. And then I did, a drawing contest using this witch here. And it was amazing to see the creativity that people came out with using my original kind of character design. And I think this was the year where I felt more and more comfortable creating original content and not feeling like I needed to rely on fan art to see interest from my audience. And I also was beginning to use gouache again and actually incorporate it with my watercolor illustrations or doing full gouache illustrations in general. And yeah, basically just progressively throughout 2019, I was getting a lot of work, and my Instagram following just really grew exponentially. And I actually started to bring my original pieces to conventions, because previously I only brought fan art. I slowly started to bring my non-fan art artwork, and they still sold, and I remember thinking that was like such a rewarding feeling. And if I remember correctly as well, but I think around this time, as my Instagram following began to grow, my sales online were slowly trickling in. And then 2019 also marked me launching my YouTube channel, which was like a really big deal. It was something that I had been thinking about for a very long time, but was just so intimidated and didn't know how to go about it. And so I uploaded my first couple videos around May, but then I just got so caught up with juggling my day job and conventions that YouTube just sort of sat on the back burner. And eventually, as the convention season kind of slowed down after the summertime and moving into fall and winter, I was like, okay, I really need to dedicate myself to YouTube. Otherwise, I'm never going to actually see any growth on here. And then as it goes, Inktober rolled around again. I wanted to continue to up the ante from previous years. And so this year, the theme was living fantasy. This year, I ended up using watercolors, inks, and gouache, which gouache wasn't something that I'd used in previous years, but I was becoming really interested in using it and enjoying mixing it with watercolors as well. And some of the pieces that I did for 2019's Inktober are some of my favorite pieces that I've ever made thus far. But yeah, so moving into 2020, that's when I decided I really wanted to dedicate myself to YouTube. And at this point, my online shop sales were like getting a little better. And so I was able to scale back a little bit from my day job. I was still working at the day job, just like fewer hours. And so I decided that I was gonna produce roughly 2 videos a month. I was like, okay, I think this is what I can feasibly manage. And that jelly gouache video, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that's probably how you found me, it just blew up. And my YouTube just grew so much faster than I ever could have imagined. And then in mid-March, the pandemic hit, and I was more or less like laid off from my day job. And so as stressful as the pandemic is and was, I thought, okay, this is my opportunity to make even more content since I'm going to be home all the time. And so since then, I've been able to make a YouTube video every week. And that kind of just snowballed into more growth on YouTube, more growth in my social media in general, getting sponsorships from brands, and then seeing way more sales in my shop. And overall, just been continuing to push myself with trying new mediums and making more products from my store. And then eventually I decided to finally launch a Patreon page, which we're on our 3rd month on Patreon. Thank you so much for those of you who are on my Patreon. It's been amazing. And I've been able to show you guys on there like my sketchbook pages, and it kind of keeps me accountable for constantly making new content. And while I have been asked to go back to my day job, having that financial support from my patrons, that has really allowed me to not feel reliant on the day job. I'm able to work very minimal hours there and still continue to produce work and content for you guys. And moving forward in my art career, I just want to continue pushing my artistic skills and obviously hope that I can be a completely independent artist. And yeah, so who knows what the rest of 2020 has in store for us. But for me, I know I definitely want to continue to branch out into different things. I've since, in the course of these years, I've made enamel pins, I've made washi tape, stickers. I'm hoping to branch out into some embroidered patches and maybe t-shirts or tote bags way down the line. I'm not really sure. And I hope that by showing you guys this kind of in-depth look into the many years of work that I've been making, all this work that I've been making, I hope that it gives you guys a good insight into how I've arrived where I am now, because I know a lot of people ask me about, you know, how did you develop your art style, or how long have you been drawing, and things like that. And so I think that this is probably the best and most comprehensive way of showing you that. And it's something that I say a lot, and you're probably sick of hearing it, but making art is a journey. It really is. It's not it shouldn't be a destination. You should always be striving to explore new things, keep adapting, keep changing, keep growing, and don't be too stressed out about I'm not good enough, or I'm not as good as this artist, or I don't feel like my work is cohesive, or whatever. I think that if you're enjoying the process, that's what really matters. And I hope that you guys had as much fun going through this roller coaster with me as I did. I especially really loved looking at that really old anime artwork, just very nostalgic. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys for your support. And I promise next week I will be back to showing you guys some actual painting. So yeah, I hope you guys are staying safe, staying healthy, and I will see you next week. Bye!